What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that puts leadership in the spotlight. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the leader of the opposition, whoever they decide that's going to be. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make the world work. We discuss everything from which bosses will be looking forward to a bumper payday to the latest developments in liquid crystal display. And of course, the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Tony Westington, the Managing Director of Spinnaker. Based in Saltash, Cornwall, Spinnaker is a company creating technology which protects billions of pounds in cash around the world every day, all while enabling a record-breaking 1,000 miles per hour attempt at the land speed record. More on that later. Spinnaker has its origins in a business founded back in 1985 to specifically solve a growing crime problem around cash-in-transit thefts. Its solutions these days have expanded into other areas and are somewhat more sophisticated than they once were. We discuss the company's evolution and its future now. Tony, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for coming on. And I think it might be a very good place to start. I know it's been a few months since yourselves have been in the review. I think the listeners would love to know what how you, the business, and how's it going?
It's going pretty well. We're very busy.
Good.
We seem to get busier and busier. We're just trying to. We're investing in new products, developing new products, and we're trying to get into new geographical markets as well. So that's taking all of our time, really, as well as, of course, keeping our existing customers happy.
Excellent. I know that's something we're going to come on to later. You know, there's a lot to talk about, especially with the issue of Britain leaving the European Union for certain now. All foreign markets will become perhaps slightly different, but we'll touch on that. But for now, let's obviously just stick with more internal matters. The business itself has obviously been going now, for those that don't know, since 1985. And the market has changed so much in that time. How has it, and just so to give people an idea here, Tony, how important has technology become to the business over the years? And I think a lot of people might not realise just how clever, as it were, your products in the market is these days.
When we started all those years ago, the technology was looking back at the time. It was new and it was different. But looking back, it was quite rough and ready in actual fact. And we were only a small business then. We were 5 or 6 people, and now we've grown to 140, and we have people in 15 different countries. But the level of technology has grown. Has grown dramatically. So we've got a lot more technical people. We've got we employ 30 pure development engineers covering software, circuit board design, and hardware design as well. So we work a lot with through the KTP system, knowledge transfer partnership, where you work closely with a university and a graduate. So that's a way of bringing new technology into the business. Something basically that you don't understand, a new niche, a new area. You work closely with the university. You have that graduate who has the abilities in a new area that you currently don't have in your armory, and you gradually then you bring on those new technologies into your business, and that's what we've been doing over the years.
And that's, I think, one of the key to successes on that front. And I know that a lot of, perhaps compared to some of the continental competitors, who, especially in Germany, who always seem to have a very good working relationship between their own business and universities. The bonus of that, as you've just described, is that key research and development angle, as well as ensuring that you have graduates that may well be tempted, of course, to work for you in the decades going forward. And I know, obviously, there's something we need to do better in this country. Could you elaborate perhaps a little bit more on, Jenny, how your knowledge transfer partnerships have worked so well for the business?
To give you one example, what we try to do is gradually evolve in terms of new technology, evolve outside of our core knowledge base. So, for example, 10 or so years ago, we weren't really dealing with tracking technology, GSM, GPS, Wi-Fi, those sort of new technologies. We were buying them in, so we didn't have the knowledge internally. So then we applied through to the KTP program. We had a graduate who was trained in those technologies, worked closely with the university. In that case, it was University of Plymouth. And then it's a period of time. You set a period of time, and it gets funded by the government to some degree, maybe 50, 60%. And then over the project period, and that could be between sort of 6 months for a short one to up to 3 years, you develop something new for the business. And in that development, you get to assess the graduate, whether he or she is suitable for the business going forward and whether they want to be in the business going forward. You work closely with the academics from the university as well to develop ideas. So at the end, you set a target you for the project, and it could be to develop. It could be pure research. It could be to develop a product and get that finished by the end, or whatever it may be. And at the end, you then decide whether you as a company and the graduate want to work together on an ongoing basis, and that has happened to us several times, which is great. But you also maintain a relationship with the university, and it's surprising how often then you refer back to the university for questions, and sometimes they can be an expert for you in a particular field. I mean, for example, very recently we needed some advice on a patent, and an expert report. And you go back to the university. So it's just good for the future of the business to keep new blood coming in, new technology coming through, but also to reach out to the universities who have got the knowledge base.
Yes, and it can't be
ideas for the future.
It can't be emphasised enough, can it, how mutually beneficial partnerships like that are for all involved. There really are no losers, and it would love to see more firms doing what you do, Spinnaker, doing exactly that. Now, something I did want to mention, and I do bring this up with some bias, in that being a bit of a fan of motor sport, I know you have had some a very exciting involvement with using some of the skills you have there, Spinnaker, with the Bloodhound LSR. And for those that aren't too familiar with that, to put it in the most layman's terms possible, it is a very fast vehicle that very excitingly, as of just last month, got over to 600 miles per hour. And could you tell us a little bit more about the project and how a firm like yours can partnership with a project like this with some transferable skills people might not think you'd have in the first instance?
Yeah, and this goes back to what I was saying about that particular KTP where we brought that tracking technology into the business. That tracking technology is vital for our products, which are mobile, secure boxes for carrying cash and valuables, obviously,
yes.
And secure vehicles. So that's vital technology for those areas. But transferable in that we have all of the different technologies in our device: GSM, GPS, Wi-Fi, and radio, and that allows us to start looking at new markets outside of our core industry. And the Bloodhound LSI is one of those. So they had a particular need, which is health and safety. In this particular instance, they understand and know they have all the technology already to know the speed they're travelling at, which is critical. But what they don't have is an ability to see exactly, see exactly where the vehicle is on the track. They have their track is a 12-mile desert in South Africa, a dry lake bed. But they need to see where that vehicle is all the time, and they need to see which way it's pointing. They need to see where all the support vehicles are, and they need to see that everyone's in place from a health and safety point of view before they go for a run each time. So yes, our tracking technology is fitted to Bloodhound and all the support vehicles to allow them to do that.
Yeah, fantastic. And there are many examples I could have picked, but certainly it's one of the more exciting ones. And I know it's going to be an exciting couple of months and years going forward with that. And so, no doubt, you're slightly now also emotionally invested with that as well, Tony, because we all want that to be a great success. Now, absolutely, yes. Now, moving on, though, if we can take a step back, Tony, looking at the market more generally here. What would you identify as things stand as the sort of medium-term challenges the market is facing at the moment?
One issue for us is attracting talent. So engineering talent in particular. We find if we have a pretty good record of keeping people, but if as we grow or if someone leaves, replacing that person is quite difficult, particularly where we're based down in the southwest. KTP is one way of employing engineers, but it isn't always straightforward.
Of course.
And you've got to be flexible. So if flexible hours, and we employ consultants as well. Sometimes we've actually had an employee that originates from Malta and decided to go back to Malta for family reasons, although we still liked working for the business. So what we've done is we've opened a branch in Malta and we're employing him in Malta. And he comes over once a month for a few days. But that's the sort of level of flexibility that you have to have now to keep your...
Can't get more flexible than that, really, I suppose, can you?
Well, it's an extreme. It's definitely an extreme. But you have to keep the products developed, and it's critical to keep your engineers up. Yeah. And
I want to pick out actually something specific there, Tony, you pulled up. I think no one would deny here we produce world-class graduates. The problem is we don't always seem to produce enough of them in the right areas. how have you found, in terms of being able to recruit young British engineers compared to those perhaps, say, in Europe? And what can we do to get better at that? And I imagine it might have to start, at secondary school, primary school, perhaps.
It absolutely has to, and I think engaging with young people, making engineering, and it's the engineering spectrum is really wide. It's software, it's hardware, it's also research, it's chemistry, it's all those things. And I just think it feels to me like from since I went to school that interest in those areas has dropped off a little bit. There's a massive requirement for software as well with this with the IoT, machine to machine, this fourth revolution in industrial revolution. So, and we see a need for that as well. But it's making it's engaging with secondary school. And it's making it interesting enough. And projects like the Bloodhound, I think, are doing that.
Yes.
Making it interesting. So, and I think, but it comes down to government. I think,
of course,
funding it and directing it to make sure that we've got the right skills. When people leave university and school.
Speaking of government, and you brought them up before I did, to be fair, Tony, we obviously it's been for a company like yours and the success you've had, of course, not just in Britain but overseas, with customers. I think you said earlier, Tony, in over 40 countries around the world, employees across Europe. You can be in any sector, whether you import or export, or perhaps neither, to know that the last 3.5 years have been difficult, not because we are either staying in or leaving the European Union, but because no one knew what we were going to be doing. The uncertainty has been unbearable. At the very least, it does look like, since the general election, that on the 31st of January we will leave the European Union. That leaves a lot of other questions open, of course, in terms of trade and immigration. But Tony, if you could just let us know, how have you found this situation? How badly, or well, let's go with badly though, have the government handled this? And what are your hopes now for the next 12 months in terms of our future relationship with the European Union, especially in terms of immigration?
I think from our point of view, I think we've been quite lucky to start with. If we've had various meetings with advisors and internally over the last 3.5 years to talk about how it affects our business and the impact. Primarily, we looked at the tariffs for our products. So that means even if we left European Union on World Trade Organization rules, then what would be the tariff on our? That worst case, what would be the tariff on our products? Yes. And it's actually 2.2%. So it's not it wouldn't have been a massive impact. It wouldn't have been a massive impact on us from that point of view, which is great. So we weren't too concerned after that point, to be perfectly honest with you. But I can see, how. But nevertheless, in terms of investment,
yes.
In terms of customers in the EU, when it came to tendering and deciding whether to buy our products, it's a concern for them. They don't know what's going to happen. No one knew what was going to happen. We still don't know exactly what's going to happen. So buying from a UK-based company is a concern because so it's definitely put us on the back foot for the last few years. But we've come back. We've tried to reassure customers. Tariff's going to be low. We have
Is it? Like, we should stress
bases in Belgium and so on.
And we should stress, because that is the worst case scenario. That
is worse.
Yes, exactly. And I think there's a general feeling. I don't know if this is reflected at Spinnaker and indeed in the Southwest as well, Tony. But there is a general feeling now, I think, that things will. Now there is a proper majority in the Commons to do things will start going a little more smoothly in terms of not just negotiations, but in terms of focusing on other things in the economy, like education.
Yes, hopefully things settle down now, and we start to get some clarity. It's absolutely required. But
yes.
in terms of trade, I mean, the difficult bit is going to be agreeing how we trade with the EU up to the deadline of the end of next year. And hopefully, from our perspective, a lot of our business is in the EU, and we don't want that disrupted at all. So we don't, from our perspective, we would like the current rules to be more or less, or a trade agreement to be in line with how we operate today. And that would be an ideal scenario.
I think you speak on behalf of every business across the European continent and the British Isles, but of course we all know that the European Commission might not be as the best way to describe it without saying something I'll regret later. They don't always perhaps do the easiest thing, and would we be at all surprised if this ends up going down to the wire? Perhaps we wouldn't be.
It's bound to, because it is so big and complex. Everyone seems to look at this in a simplistic way all the time, but the reality is it's a massive thing to be discussed. And until you get into it, you don't see the wood for the trees. It's really there's a lot to be done, and there's going to be a lot of horse trading. How will it end up? I don't know. But
if you were, you'd be a very rich man, Tony. I mean, we could.
Well, exactly.
We could talk about this for. I know I'm conscious of the time, though. So perhaps if we'll draw a close, Tony, and I can ask. It's been Spinnaker a fantastic few years, and what are the plans for the next 12 months or so?
The plans are to carry on developing relationships with new markets, which we're doing. It's coming along well. We have been developing new products. Those are going to be some of those new products are going to be launched next year, which is quite exciting. But also, we are with our tracking technology, we are starting to step outside of our core market. And we have quite a few leads that we have to follow up. So there's a lot of machines, there's a lot of devices out there in the market which really need to be managed better from a security point of view, also from an efficiency point of view, which helps from an environmental viewpoint as well. So that there's a lot of requirement there. So we're going to be developing those markets over the next 12 months.
Well, so there's going to be a lot for us to talk about, isn't there, over the next in 2020? I'm looking forward to it. But for now, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Tony, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Spinnaker are continuing to raise standards. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, Eric Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the United Kingdom's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexillologist. That's flags to you and me. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to Eric. Here it is now. Lord Pickles, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. indeed before the days we were in the common market. But of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? I mean, of course, you resident there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshireman, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your old constituents right now? Hang in there; it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament because, you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want. And I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice, but leadership.
Well, I was used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. I certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up.
And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians are uninterested, because honestly, as you'll know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
I think so, and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay for to be members, and it's a way of not beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
Now, echoing the words, of course, your fellow Chairman Lord Blunkett has said, what some might not know is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Blunkett.
Oh, absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was it?
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the show front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it then that moved you from radical Marxists to running the only inner-city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. And I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. And I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I will join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around, and my family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to it. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed, but I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through.
Through and through.
Although I do know the story, most people might guess that a dying Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office. But who is it that you have?
I'd Che Guevara. Which I always had him over my left shoulder of visitors, and they always used to kind of, you see their eyes going up and thinking, who, I can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I thought it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commies would take over.
I'm sure David Bump was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives would never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided. I mean, I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realised that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, you can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this in Victoria, just over the road at Cardinal Place, a fantastically new development site which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was the proudest moment, do you think, in serving Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Troubled Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the state, and it was on the basis of tough love. It's on the basis of getting people into jobs. It's about dealing with the kind of the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress, since of course you're stepped down to being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, continues the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in the local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, I may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet that this is something like that goes in the state to repress. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old maids cycling to evensong and Warburn. Yeah, I mean, it's such a basic thing. It's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls. And they said they thought the process of a photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
And I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many members, many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, I don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, and I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless, I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption-free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all past that. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I got a bit stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you're also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
Very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let the listeners know what projects you are working with and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country? Well,
I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you referenced as well. It's so important, especially at this time of history, so many years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, and particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that, or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, it's like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death camps. And we need to kind of understand the Einsatzgruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. The hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are.
And I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away. I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important and people do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to.
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it would be good to get through Brexit over the coming years, and it would be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle. Those have been left behind by our economic progress, and it would be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure, but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know this is going to be a huge focus of the next review. Because thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off to the Red Lion to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.